Hello, good evening. Will badgers be to David Cameron what hunted foxes became to Tony Blair, a totemic or toxic symbol of the curious relationship the English have with their animals and their traditions that does not welcome political interference? As the first pilot for a badger cull received its licence, 100,000 people petitioned to stop the killing. And today, this programme learned of intimidation towards farmers supporting the cull by animal rights protesters. Campaigners say the cull, intended to reduce TB in cattle, will have no significant effect. The government says it's got to be tried. Here's Liz McKean.
In the dead of night, disputed territory in the latest clash between farmers and wildlife campaigners. Using a night vision camera, we were secretly shown one of the largest sets in Gloucestershire, a pilot zone for the mass slaughter of badgers.
This is one of the first areas where the cull will begin, in the set behind me. Bait will be laid to encourage the badgers to come out to eat. When they're in the habit of doing that, they'll be shot.
Cattle farmers say the move will limit the endless spread of TB through their herds, but the plans are provoking fury.
Any day now, the silence of the Gloucestershire night will be broken as campaigners rampage around the area, making as much noise as possible to scare the badgers away. They say that if they see anyone with a shotgun, they'll stand in the way to stop the badgers getting hurt.
Protester and farmer, there is a gulf in mutual understanding and sympathy. Both are certain they're right. Jan Rowe has helped organise the Gloucestershire cull. His own farm lies outside its boundary. But for most of 2 decades, cattle TB has laid siege to his dairy herd, costing him, he reckons, £500,000.
We have to do something different to what we're doing now and to sit back and let farmers take the strain. We know DEFRA's budget's coming under pressure, compensation's likely to be cut back, cattle measures are going to be ramped up again. You know, there is a huge threat to the cattle industry in the west of the country if we don't do something that's effective against this disease.
This protester coordinates the group Stop the Cull. He's promising direct action and wants to remain anonymous in case he's targeted.
We'll be using vuvuzelas and megaphones to disrupt the cull directly, so that if we see marksmen and we can see badgers, we'll make a lot of noise and we'll use the lights immediately so that hopefully the badgers will run off.
He says there are 3 groupings opposed to the cull.
The largest group, RSPCA, Save Me, Brian May, their campaigning is broadly political and political lobbying. We are a direct action group that will go in and, like Hunt Sabs, stop the cull when it's taking place. And then there's a much more extreme group, which I would guess would be the Animal Liberation Front.
And what sort of tactics are they threatening?
The Animal Liberation Front have put out communiques saying that they will superglue the cash points of Sainsbury's.
If it stocks milk from cull areas?
Yes.
It isn't just protests, but locals are facing economic consequences too, with a possible consumer boycott. Areas like Tewkesbury rely on the tourism trade, while some supermarkets are reassuring their customers they won't stock milk that comes from the cull areas. The protesters claim that farmers in Gloucestershire are losing heart and support for the cull, with some even pulling out because of the pressure. And that's why they're not taking part in the cull?
Yes, they were. They had initially said that they would, and now that they're saying they won't.
And what's changed their mind?
I think it is the amount of publicity it's getting and the amount of public outcry.
We talked to one of those farmers and she told us there was another reason for her change of heart, a threatening phone call.
It was harassment. They said, oh, you've got a fantastic garden, a fantastic looking farm. You must have a lovely lifestyle there. You enter in the badger scheme, you'll be coming with some consequences. And I'm subsequently thinking about it all now, whether to go ahead with it or not, because this is rather frightening.
Stop the Cull insist they don't support such tactics.
We completely condemn harassment and we completely condemn damage to personal property.
Scientists agree that killing most of the badgers in the pilot areas will have an impact on cattle TB. If the full programme goes ahead, As many as 100,000 badgers will be culled, reducing cattle TB by about 16%. The argument between farmers and campaigners is whether that reduction justifies the slaughter.
I think the emotion and sentiment around the badger is probably most of the problem. I think it's a very difficult disease to try and tell people all the problems with it and how the badger is so significant in maintaining this reservoir of it. And until we deal with that in a significant way, and eventually that may be vaccines, but as yet they're just not really ready for use, then we have to look at other ways of getting on top of the disease.
Vaccination, promoted as cure not kill, is being tried over the border in Wales. It's labour intensive, with each badger being trapped and injected. An oral vaccine would be more cost effective, but is still in development. Another approach, the vaccination of cattle, is banned by the EU. With no technical fix, the conflict is moving towards difficult terrain, to be played out in darkness and in anger.
Liz McKean there. Well, the Badger Minister, David Heath, has gone underground, but we are now joined from Leicester by the birdwatcher and broadcaster Bill Oddie, who's campaigned against the cull, and here in the studio by Peter Kendall, President of the National Farmers Union, David Bowles from the RSPCA and the Conservative MP in Government Aid, Daniel Kaczynski. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. And if I start with you, Bill Oddie, if people are pulling out of these pilots through intimidation, as you heard in the piece, is that a good thing?
Well, I think I would probably say it's the right result for the wrong reason, because the thing that bothers me most, I think, and never seems to get a mention, is that we have, as conservationists, had a ever-improving relationship with farmers for a considerable time now, and that was very important because the British countryside and farmland in particular was losing its wildlife, not just badgers, losing wildlife all down the way. And it's going to be very sad if we're now being set up against one another, because believe me, there are plenty of farmers who, and not just in those cull areas, who have chosen not to go in with the cull, and it would be very detrimental to British countryside and wildlife in general. I certainly don't condone any kind of guerrilla violent tactics, although I have to say the practicality of carrying out this cull is another big problem, because, you know, I've watched enough badgers and filmed enough badgers to know you only have to crack a twig and Mr. Badger is down in his set and he ain't coming out for several hours. So how on earth marksmen are going to wander around in pitch darkness and shoot badgers, I simply do not know. And there's bound to be confrontation.
Well, let me just pick up, first of all, with you, David Bowles, the RSPCA. I mean, you just heard Bill Oddie say he condemns guerrilla violent tactics, but this is going to be the way that it happens, isn't it? I mean, people are going to be intimidated out of participating. Well,
obviously, the RSPCA agrees with Bill. We condemn violence on all sides. And I think there's been... What we're trying to do is to highlight the fact that actually badger culling is not going to achieve what we all want to achieve, which is a reduction in bovine TB in the cattle herd. And what we've seen is the government saying to farmers, if you go down this route, your problems are going to be solved. They're not. As you said in your piece, we could see reductions of as little as 3% in the cull areas and around about 16% as an average. That's tiny in terms of the fact that you're wiping out 70% of a protected animal.
Peter Kendall, it's not even about the emotion of it, it's about the science and the stats.
Actually, for the reasons for a judicial review and the way the government presented its figures, it shows over the average 9 years of the ISG, this is the Independent Scientific Group's scientific experiment, it shows a 16% reduction. If you go to those areas today, there's over a 30% reduction in TB in cattle. If you go to Ireland, where they're doing a cull of badgers, there's already over a 30% reduction. Now, this isn't just a one solution. We know we have to work with cattle movements. We know we have to work on vaccination as well. But reluctantly, and this is a big reluctant one because of exactly what Bill said about our relationship with the countryside and everybody who loves the countryside, reluctantly, we've got to start and wind back the reservoir of disease in badgers.
Bill Oddie, I'm just going to let you come back there because you said that this would set up a friction between the farmers and the conservationists.
Yeah.
I mean, surely you want to wipe out that disease.
Of course, and conservationists had for years and years and years. It's not new, this. It's been going on for many, many years. Proof I'm holding in my hand here, a publication which was a couple of years ago from the Wildlife Trust, and it's telling the members what the problem is and sympathising entirely with farmers and saying basically we're trying to achieve the same thing. My argument, frankly, if you want to put one set of people up against another set of people, let's just put the farmers aside. It's the conservationists against this flipping government who are showing a considerable ignorance and arrogance in just about everything to do with wildlife and the countryside. That's my big worry.
Daniel Kaczynski, for the purposes of this debate, you are the flipping government. You can come straight back there and respond.
Well, what Bill Oddie hasn't talked about, of course, is the suffering of the badgers themselves. They suffer appalling death as a result of bovine tuberculosis. And we need to take on...
Wait, so you're culling the badgers so that they feel better?
Well,
yes,
we're culling a limited cull of badgers in hotspot areas in order to try to tackle this rampant disease which has blown out of all proportion across England.
It's a bit cynical, though, isn't it, to say it'll make the badgers feel much better? I mean, why don't you stand up and say this is about industry and maybe it's about protecting those people that need your support?
Well, I have to say, representing a very rural constituency like Shrewsbury, I have sat on many occasions with farmers in their kitchens and seen grown men cry when all of their herds have been slaughtered, and the devastation that this causes to families, to my Shropshire dairy farmers and to the local community is of the most profound nature. And I say to Mr. Oddie, I would suggest to you, sir, that you spend some time with me in my constituency and meet some of my Shropshire dairy farmers and see the devastation and the misery that they are going through as a result of a lack of action by the previous Labour administration over many years.
Bill Oddie, briefly.
Is that not a political thing that you want to be seen to be doing something, and that's actually what your government is about? Oh, look, we've done something.
No, we have a duty and a responsibility. We have a duty and a responsibility, sir, to ensure that that England does continue to have a dairy industry, and unless we take these steps, thousands of dairy farmers will go out of business.
Let's talk about the dairy question for a second, because there is now a campaign that others have signed to try and get supermarkets to register the equivalent of dolphin-friendly tuna, i.e. milk from places where badgers have not been culled. Is that workable, and would you support it? Should people be buying milk that has not come from those farms?
Well, in your piece to start off with, you said that the number 10 petition had got 100,000 signatures, one of the fastest growing petitions in only 2 weeks. It's still going up. I think that shows the depth of the frustration and anger amongst the public. We've known from the 2 government consultations that a majority of the public do not want to see culling.
That was specifically about the culling.
So
but would you like to see people boycott milk that did not come from badger-friendly farms?
What we would like to see is people being given a choice when they go into their supermarket whether to buy milk from a badger cull area or not. It's a very simple consumer choice issue. It's not about a boycott. It's a very simple consumer choice. At the moment, they don't have that choice.
The modern dairy industry is incredibly complicated. Sometimes supermarkets will buy an aggregated supply of milk. Sometimes they have it from just a few producers. I just think it's a really dangerous message. You know the problems the dairy industry is having in the United Kingdom at this moment in time. And to try and bankrupt and put people out of business, to try and stop them being involved, you're trying to save an industry. And that's what I worry about this debate. In 1998, there were 9,000 cattle slaughtered. Last year, there were 32,000 cattle slaughtered because of TB. This is an explosion of disease. We must do something about it. And to try and drive people out of business, to stop them tackling the reservoir of disease, I think is an incredibly irresponsible line to take.
What we don't know is, obviously, if we get the licences in both these areas happening, the government has then said they will go to 10 additional culls each year. Where do we stop? Do we wipe out 70% of the badgers in the southwest of England, in the south of England, all over England? This is a protected species. And the ironic thing is, just across the border from Daniel's constituency, the Welsh Government, looking at the same science, looking at the same statistics, have decided to go down a humane vaccination route rather than a cull route.
Danny Paczynski.
I think the most important thing to remember here is that the government has had a consultation on this. The scientists...
Wait a sec. The government got rid of all its vaccination trials when it came into power. It didn't want to spend the money on them. That's not much a consultation.
Over 50% of the public said they didn't want the cull. The government ignored them.
The government's line on this, which is to have a limited cull of badgers, has been backed by the High Court. The Badger Trust and others took us for a judicial review to the High Court. The High Court has ruled in our favour. And I think what we have to remember, what all of us in this audience have to remember is, the High Court has assessed and taken a huge amount of time to look through all the evidence.
You're pushing this onto somebody else's plate. If this turns into the equivalent of the fox hunting ban for Tony Blair, which he then said he regretted, would it be worth it?
I'm very pleased that my neighbour, Owen Paterson, MP for North Shropshire, is the new DEFRA Secretary. He's very committed to this, and I and other rural MPs who have a duty and a responsibility to our dairy farmers will insist the government fulfills its obligations in this matter.
But Lottie, let me ask you about the practicalities of this now. Do you think that they will be able to stop this going ahead?
Who was that question to?
That was to you, Bill Oddie.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't catching that earpiece thingy. Well, it's going. I tweeted, as you're supposed to do these days, some weeks ago, and said I'm afraid this is going to turn nasty, and that was. It didn't take anybody with great predictive powers to actually say that. It's perfectly obvious that it was, and it will, and it's a dangerous situation. I think the police will be the next people who will interfere and say we can't guarantee the safety of people in an area where there are people with guns at night, in dark, and other people wandering around trying to interrupt them.
The amount of money they're spending on this is more than the amount that you'd actually focus on cutting out TB.
No, it's not. Well, the message what Bill should be tweeting and the RSPB should be, this must not turn nasty. This must not, and all the organisations out there campaigning against the cull should be putting out a really, really strong signal that lady on there should not be being threatened. Well, absolutely. And that's why when Bill tweets, this is going to turn nasty, I would like to see all the campaigners for wildlife saying, this must not turn nasty. We should not be threatening law-abiding people living in the countryside. We should put a strong message out saying this sort of behaviour is beyond the pale.
We don't obviously want to see things turn nasty. We don't want illegal activities. But in a lot of the areas, there are people that also feel intimidated and scared to speak out actually against the cull because they feel that they're intimidated. So it works both ways.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed. Thanks a lot.